Commander Kale Vorthak's hand trembled as he reviewed the marriage contract for the third time. The holographic display cast blue shadows across his scarred face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. Outside his quarters aboard the UEC Defiance, the stars wheeled past in their eternal dance, indifferent to the choice that would reshape his life. "The Terran female has agreed to all terms," his adjutant reported, standing at rigid attention. "Full diplomatic immunity, shared quarters, and a 5-year minimum commitment. The Council of Worlds has approved the union." Kyle nodded curtly, though every instinct screamed against this decision. The marriage wasn't born of love or even attraction. It was pure strategy. The hegemony wars had left humanity's reputation in tatters. Despite their recent victories against the Vexthari Empire, most galactic species still viewed humans as barbaric upstarts. A marriage between a decorated Alterian commander and a human diplomat would send a powerful message. Humanity deserved respect, not just fear. The door chimed, and she entered. Lyra Salas moved with quiet confidence, her auburn hair catching the blue light of the holo display. She was smaller than most humans he'd encountered in battle, but there was something in her green eyes that made him reconsider his assumptions. Intelligence burned there along with something else, a steel core wrapped in diplomatic silk. "Commander Vorthak," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Her voice carried the musical accent of Earth's northern continents. "Ambassador Salas." He clasped her hand briefly, noting the firmness of her grip. "I trust you understand the practical nature of our arrangement?" A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Entirely practical. A political alliance disguised as romance. You need humanity's reputation rehabilitated, and I need an inside perspective on Alterian military strategy for the peace negotiations." Her directness caught him off guard. Most diplomats wrapped their words in layers of meaning, but she spoke with the bluntness of a soldier. "The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow. The media presence will be significant." "I've dealt with worse audiences," she replied, studying his face with unsettling intensity. "Though I should warn you, I have some rather strong opinions about the Vexthari situation, such as your species' approach to the prison colonies. The conditions are barbaric even by wartime standards." She spoke without accusation, merely stating facts. "If we're to be married, even in name only, I won't pretend to agree with policies I find morally reprehensible." Kyle felt his spine stiffen. The prison colonies were a necessity. The Vexthari had shown no mercy to human civilians during their expansion. Yet something in her tone made him pause. She wasn't challenging him out of naive idealism. She was drawing a line in the sand. "And if I refuse to discuss such matters with my wife, then our marriage will be exactly what the galaxy expects, a cold political theater." She moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. "But if you're willing to consider that humanity might have something to offer beyond their reputation, for violence we might actually accomplish something meaningful." As she stood silhouetted against the cosmos, Kale realized he had drastically underestimated Lyra Salas. This wasn't just another human seeking advantage through alien connections. This was someone who might actually change his mind about her entire species. The thought terrified him more than any battlefield he'd ever faced. The wedding ceremony aboard the diplomatic station Meridian Prime was a spectacle of interspecies politics. Representatives from dozens of worlds attended, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic unity. Kale stood at attention in his formal military dress, the crystal formations on his shoulders marking his rank, catching the artificial sunlight streaming through the station's viewing dome. Lyra approached through the assembled crowd wearing traditional, Alterian ceremonial robes modified for human physiology. The deep crimson fabric complemented her auburn hair, and the way she carried herself transformed what could have been an awkward costume into something regal. Several Alterian dignitaries nodded approvingly. She had clearly studied their customs extensively. "You look surprised," she murmured as she took her place beside him. "I expected you to wear human formal attire," he admitted quietly. "Today, I represent humanity's willingness to embrace galactic culture. Tomorrow we can discuss the reciprocal arrangement. Her words carried a diplomatic edge that promised interesting conversations ahead. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient Alterian traditions, with the Hierophant of the Crystal Throne speaking the ritual words that would bind them legally and culturally. But as they exchanged the ceremonial crystals, his a deep blue signifying honor, hers a green representing growth, Kale found himself studying her face. She wasn't merely playing a role. When she spoke the binding words in flawless, high Alterian, her voice carried genuine respect for the language and its meaning. When she pressed her crystal against his in the final gesture of unity, her touch lingered just a moment longer than protocol required. The reception that followed tested both their diplomatic skills. Admiral Zephyr of the Crystalline Collective cornered them near the refreshment stations, his translator crystal humming with barely contained suspicion. "Tell me, Ambassador Solace." The Admiral's words crackled through the device. "How does humanity plan to address the complications arising from the Kepler-7 incident?" Kale tensed. The Kepler-7 incident had been humanity's darkest moment. An entire colony world rendered uninhabitable when human terraforming equipment malfunctioned catastrophically. The galactic community had never fully accepted humanity's claims that it was an accident. "By learning from our mistakes and ensuring they never happen again," Lyra replied calmly. "The Kepler Memorial Foundation has already begun developing new safety protocols that will be shared freely with all member species." "Pretty words," Admiral Zephyr buzzed. "But actions speak louder than diplomatic platitudes." "Indeed they do." Lyra's voice carried a new edge. "Which is why humanity has volunteered to provide disaster relief expertise to the Vorten colonies affected by the plasma storms last month. No compensation requested." Kyle stared at her. The Vorten situation was classified military intelligence. How did she know about the plasma storms? And more importantly, when had humanity's leadership approved such generous aid? Admiral Zephyr's translator remained silent for a long moment. "Interesting. We had not heard of this offer." "Because it was made through proper channels this morning," Lyra smiled. "Sometimes the best diplomacy happens behind closed doors." Later, as they retreated to their shared quarters, Kale confronted her. "The Vorten aid package, that wasn't approved by your government." "Not yet," she admitted, removing the ceremonial jewelry with practiced efficiency. "But it will be by tomorrow. I sent the proposal to Earth before the ceremony." "You're gambling with your career." "I'm gambling with our future." She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "This marriage may have started as political theater, but every moment we waste on pretense is a moment we could be solving actual problems." "And if Earth rejects your proposal? Then I'll find another way." Humanity didn't survive the hegemony wars by accepting defeat gracefully. She studied his face with those penetrating green eyes. "Tell me about the Vexthari prison colonies. Not the official reports, what you actually saw there." The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd expected political maneuvering, diplomatic games, perhaps even personal attraction. He hadn't expected her to ask him to examine the shadows of his own conscience. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because the male I married today ordered those facilities built. If I'm going to understand him, I need to understand his choices." The simple honesty of her words stripped away every defense he'd built around that decision. For the first time since their marriage began, Kale wondered if practical reasons might lead to something far more complicated than either of them had planned. 3 months into their marriage, Kale found himself looking forward to Lyra's daily briefings with an intensity that unsettled him. She had transformed their shared quarters into a kind of command center, with holographic displays showing everything from refugee movements to trade route negotiations. Her mind worked like a tactical computer, but with an emotional component that consistently surprised him. "The Draconis Confederation is wavering on the Mineral Rights Treaty," she reported, manipulating the holographic display with practiced gestures. "They're concerned about humanity's mining practices after what happened at Kepler-7. Then we demonstrate safer alternatives," Cal replied, reviewing casualty reports from the ongoing Vexthari suppression campaigns. The Alterian crystal extraction methods cause minimal environmental damage. That's exactly what I proposed to Ambassador Veltar yesterday. He was intrigued. She paused, studying his expression. You're not listening. He looked up from his reports, suddenly aware that his attention had drifted. I'm sorry, these casualty numbers. Another prison colony incident? The question hung in the air between them. Over the past month, she had gradually drawn him into conversations about military ethics that left him questioning decisions he'd once considered unshakable. Not through accusation or argument, but through careful questions that forced him to examine his own motivations. 17 dead, he said quietly. The Vexthari prisoners attempted to escape during a supply transfer. Standard protocols were followed. Standard protocols. She repeated the words without inflection, but he could hear the weight behind them. You disapprove. I wonder if there might be alternatives to shooting prisoners who are desperate enough to attempt escape from a high-security facility. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the subtle scent of her hair. What were the conditions that made them desperate enough to try? They're war criminals, Lyra. They participated in the systematic extermination of human colonies. Some of them, yes. But your own reports indicate that nearly 30% of the prison population consists of conscripted soldiers who had no choice in their assignments. Her voice remained calm, but he could sense the passion underneath. Children forced into military service, civilians who took up arms only when their homes were invaded. War doesn't allow for such distinctions. Peace does. The simple statement hit him like a plasma bolt. Peace. The concept had seemed so foreign, for so long that he'd almost forgotten it was the ultimate objective of everything they were trying to accomplish. What would you have me do? Release known killers back into the galaxy? I'd have you remember that the male I married is capable of thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation. She placed her hand on his arm, and the contact sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. The war is over, Cale, but you're still fighting it. Before he could respond, their comm system activated with an emergency priority signal. Admiral Korvac's image materialized in the holographic display, his expression grim. Commander Vorthak, we have a situation developing in the Rigel system. Vexthari forces have broken through the perimeter defenses around Colony Prime. Kyle's blood turned to ice. Colony Prime housed over 2 million civilians, mostly human families who had relocated there after the war. How many ships? 15 battlecruisers confirmed. Intelligence suggests they're using the prison colony escapes as cover for a full-scale rescue operation. Rescue operation? Lyra stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her composed demeanor despite the gravity of the situation. Admiral, are you saying the Vexthari are attempting to liberate their people from our detention facilities? I'm saying they're using military force against civilian targets, Admiral Korvac replied sharply. Commander, you're ordered to take the Defiance and intercept them before they reach the colony. Cale felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders, but this time something was different. Lyra's presence beside him seemed to cast everything in a new light. Admiral, he said slowly, what if we offered a prisoner exchange instead of a military engagement? The silence that followed his words was profound. Admiral Korvac's image flickered slightly, as if the communication system itself was struggling to process what he'd said. Did you just suggest negotiating with terrorists, Commander? I suggested preventing unnecessary casualties on both sides. Cale felt Lyra's hand tighten on his arm, lending him strength. The Vexthari are fighting to retrieve their people. If we can accomplish the same objective without bloodshed, your orders are to engage and destroy the enemy fleet. Those orders come directly from the High Command. The connection terminated, leaving them alone with the weight of an impossible choice. Kyle stared at the dark holographic display, knowing that in a few hours he would have to choose between his duty as an Alterian officer and the growing conviction that there might be a better way. Whatever you decide, Lyra said quietly, I'll stand beside you. For the first time since their marriage began, Cale realized that his practical arrangement had evolved into something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. A partnership that was changing the very core of who he was. The bridge of the UEC Defiance hummed with pre-battle tension as Kale stood before the main tactical display. 15 Vexithari cruisers moved in perfect formation toward Colony Prime, their weapon systems powered but not yet targeting the civilian station. His own battle group consisted of 8 ships, adequate for the engagement, but victory would come at a cost measured in lives on both sides. "Commander," his tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet will reach Colony Prime in 47 minutes. They're maintaining standard approach vectors." "Any communication attempts from the Vexthari?" "Negative, sir. They're maintaining radio silence." Kyle studied the display, his mind racing through tactical scenarios. Every simulation ended the same way: decisive victory for the Alterian fleet, but with significant casualties. The Vexthari would fight to the last ship if they believed their people were at stake. "Sir." Communications Officer Renth spoke up hesitantly. "We're receiving a transmission from Colony Prime. It's Ambassador Solace." Lyra's face appeared on the auxiliary screen, transmitted from the diplomatic quarters aboard the civilian station. Behind her, he could see the efficient chaos of an evacuation in progress. "Kyle," she said without preamble, "I'm aboard Colony Prime coordinating the civilian evacuation, but I need you to know something. I've been in communication with the Vexthari fleet." Every officer on the bridge turned to stare at the screen. Unauthorized communication with enemy forces during wartime was a court-martial offense. "Possibly treason." "Explain," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Their fleet commander is Admiral Thexvor, the same officer who negotiated the original ceasefire agreements. He's not here to attack civilians, Kale. He's here to retrieve approximately 3,000 Vexthari prisoners from the detention facility orbiting Colony Prime." 3,000? Kyle felt his stomach sink. Military intelligence had reported only 800 prisoners at that facility. The facility has been receiving transfers from other sites without proper documentation. Many of the prisoners are non-combatants, medical personnel, engineers, family members of military officers who were captured during the war. The implications hit him like a cascade failure. If the prison administrators had been falsifying reports, it meant the entire detention system was compromised. Worse, it meant he had been making decisions based on incomplete information. What does Admiral Thexvor propose? A prisoner exchange. All non-combatant detainees released immediately in exchange for safe passage and a formal review of the remaining cases within 30 days. "Sir," his weapons officer interrupted, "we have firing solutions on all enemy vessels. Recommend immediate engagement before they can launch fighters." Kale looked around the bridge at the faces of his crew, good soldiers, who trusted him to make the right decision. Then he looked back at Lyra's image on the screen. She wasn't just his diplomatic wife anymore. She was the person who had taught him to see beyond the immediate tactical situation. "Admiral Thexvor," he said, raising his voice toward the communication. "Array, this is Commander Kale Vorthak of the Alterian Defense Force. I'm prepared to discuss terms." The bridge erupted in surprised murmurs from his crew, but Kale held up a hand for silence. A moment later, the main screen flickered to life with the image of a Vexthari officer, tall, reptilian, with the scarred hide that marked him as a veteran of the Hegemony Wars. "Commander Vorthak." Admiral Thexvor's voice carried the mechanical precision of a universal translator. "I am pleased that someone is willing to speak reason." "Before we proceed," Kale said, "I need verification of the prisoner numbers and classifications." "Of course." Thexvor manipulated something off-screen, and data began flowing to the Defiance's computers. "You will find that many of those you hold are guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place when the war began." As the data populated on his tactical display, Kale felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The prison facility's official reports bore little resemblance to the reality Thexvor was presenting. Children as young as 14, medical personnel who had treated wounded soldiers, civilian engineers who had been conscripted to maintain military equipment. "Sir," his executive officer whispered urgently, "High Command's orders were explicit. We cannot negotiate with High Command's orders were based on incomplete intelligence, Kyle interrupted. He looked once more at Lyra's face on the auxiliary screen, drawing strength from her steady gaze. Admiral Thexivor, I propose the following. Immediate release of all non-combatant prisoners as verified by neutral parties, safe passage for your fleet, and a formal review process for remaining detainees, and in exchange, a commitment from the Vexthari government to participate in the upcoming peace negotiations without preconditions. Thexvor's scaled face was difficult to read, but his posture suggested careful consideration. You realize that your own command structure may not support this decision? That's my concern to manage. Then we have an agreement, Commander. The galaxy may yet remember this day as the moment when wisdom prevailed over warfare. As both fleets began the delicate process of standing down their weapons, Kyle realized that his practical marriage had just helped him make the most important decision of his military career. The consequences would be significant, possibly career-ending, but for the first time in years he felt he had chosen the right path rather than the easy one. Commander. Lyra's voice came through the comm system, warm with pride. Well done. He smiled, surprising himself with the genuine happiness in the expression. We make a good team, Ambassador. The words carried more weight than either of them had expected when they first spoke their marriage vows, but Kale found he didn't mind the implications. Practical arrangements, it seemed, could evolve into something far more meaningful when guided by shared principles and mutual respect. The court-martial proceedings took place in the crystalline halls of the Alterian High Command, where the walls themselves seemed to judge Kale's actions. He sat at the defendant's table in full-dress uniform, his service ribbons and commendations a stark reminder of his previously unblemished record. The charges were serious: disobedience of direct orders, unauthorized negotiation with enemy forces, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Lyra sat in the observation gallery, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of military bureaucracy. She had volunteered to testify on his behalf, despite warnings from Earth's diplomatic corps that her involvement could damage her own career. Commander Vorthak, General Korath's voice echoed through the chamber. You stand accused of placing your personal judgment above the orders of your superiors. How do you plead? Guilty of the charges as stated, sir. Kale's response sent murmurs through the assembled officers. But I request the opportunity to explain the circumstances that led to my decision. The circumstances are irrelevant, Admiral, Korvac interjected from the prosecution table. Military discipline requires absolute obedience to lawful orders. Commander Vorthak's actions, however well-intentioned, undermine the very foundation of military authority. If the court permits, Lyra's voice carried clearly from the gallery, I would like to present evidence that may be relevant to the commander's decision-making process. General Korath's crystalline features showed surprise. Ambassador Solace, you are not part of these proceedings. No, sir, but I am the person whose intelligence gathering made the commander's decision possible. If the court is to judge his actions, it should understand the full context of the situation he faced. After a brief consultation with his fellow judges, General Korath nodded. You may approach the witness stand. Lyra moved with calm dignity to the center of the chamber. She had traded her usual diplomatic attire for a simple black suit that made her appear both professional and approachable, every inch the competent human representative. Ambassador, the prosecution began, isn't it true that you maintained unauthorized communication with enemy forces during active military operations? I maintained communication with Admiral Thexivor under the provisions of the Interspecies Diplomatic Immunity Act, she replied smoothly. As a certified ambassador, I have the authority to engage in preliminary negotiations when civilian lives are at stake. But you influenced Commander Vorthak's tactical decisions. I provided him with accurate intelligence that had been systematically withheld from military commanders. Her voice carried a steel edge that made several officers shift, uncomfortably. Intelligence that revealed our prison system was holding approximately 2,000 non-combatants in direct violation of the Geneva Conventions and the Galactic Accords on treatment of prisoners. The courtroom erupted in surprised conversation. Admiral Korvac slammed his hand on the prosecution table. Those are serious allegations, Ambassador. Do you have proof? I have documentation provided by the Vexthari fleet, independently verified by the Neutral Zones Monitoring Commission. She gestured, and holographic displays filled the chamber with data streams, prisoner manifests, and medical records. Children, medical personnel, civilian engineers, all classified as enemy combatants despite clear evidence to the contrary. Kale watched the faces of his judges as they absorbed the information. General Korath's expression remained carefully neutral, but several of the other officers showed signs of discomfort. Even if these allegations are accurate, Admiral Korvac continued, military commanders cannot be permitted to make unilateral decisions based on incomplete information. The information wasn't incomplete, Lyra replied. It was deliberately falsified. The prison administrators have been inflating numbers and misclassifying prisoners to justify larger budgets and expanded facilities. And you uncovered this how? By doing what diplomats do, asking questions and following up on inconsistencies. She looked directly at Kale, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Commander Vorthak didn't act rashly. He acted on the best available intelligence to prevent an unnecessary battle that would have cost lives on both sides. The ambassador raises valid points, General Korath said slowly. However, military discipline cannot be subordinated to diplomatic convenience. Commander Vorthak, do you have anything to add? Kyle rose to his feet, feeling the weight of his career in the balance. General, I became a soldier to protect innocent lives. When I learned that our actions were endangering those same innocents, I chose to follow my oath rather than my orders. I accept full responsibility for that choice. And if faced with the same situation again, I would make the same decision, sir. The courtroom fell silent. Kale had just admitted that he would continue to prioritize his conscience over military orders, a statement that should have guaranteed his dismissal from service. The court will recess for deliberation, General Korath announced. As the judges filed out, Lyra approached the defendant's table. That was either very brave or very foolish, she said quietly. Probably both. He studied her face, seeing something new in her expression. Why did you risk your career for me? Because somewhere in the past 5 months, this stopped being about political convenience. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because you're the most honorable person I've ever met, and the galaxy needs more officers like you. The words hung between them, carrying implications that went far beyond their practical arrangement. Kale realized that his marriage of convenience had become something neither of them had expected, a partnership built on shared values and mutual respect that was transforming into something deeper. When the court reconvened an hour later, General Korath's expression was unreadable. Commander Vorthak, this court finds you guilty of disobedience of orders. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the evidence of systematic misconduct in the prison system, the court sentences you to formal reprimand and transfer to the diplomatic corps as military advisor. It wasn't the outcome anyone had expected. Kale would keep his rank but lose his combat command, a punishment that was also an opportunity. You'll be working closely with your wife, General Korath added, with what might have been a slight smile. I trust that won't be a problem. As they left the courthouse together, Lyra slipped her hand into his, a gesture that felt entirely natural, despite the artificial nature of their marriage. So, she said, ready to try being married to a diplomat? Full-time? I think I'm ready to try being married to you, he replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the statement. The practical arrangement was evolving into something neither of them had planned, but both were beginning to embrace. 2 years. After the court-martial, Kale stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station New Geneva, watching the latest batch of refugee ships arrive from the former war zones. The Galactic Reconciliation Initiative had become the largest peacekeeping operation in recorded history, and he had found himself at the center of it all. The Andromedan delegation is requesting a private meeting about the terraforming rights, Lyra said, joining him at the viewport. She moved to stand beside him with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had shared both professional and personal space for years. They're still concerned about human expansion policies? They're concerned about human competence after Kepler-7. She handed him a data pad containing the meeting agenda. But I think we can address their concerns with the new safety protocols. Kyle reviewed the information, marveling at how naturally they had learned to work together. The transition from military commander to diplomatic advisor had been challenging, but Lyra had been his anchor throughout the process. Her patience in teaching him the subtleties of interspecies negotiation had been matched only by his growing respect for her skills. The Vexthari integration program is ahead of schedule, he reported, scrolling through status updates. Admiral Thexvor's people have been instrumental in establishing the new colony worlds. Hard to believe we were shooting at each other 3 years ago. Hard to believe we were strangers 3 years ago. The words slipped out before he could stop them, carrying more weight than casual conversation. Lyra turned to look at him, and he saw his own realization reflected in her green eyes. "Kale," she said softly, "what are we doing here?" "I mean professionally, or, you know what I mean." He did know. The question had been hanging between them for months, growing stronger with each shared success, each evening spent reviewing reports in their quarters, each moment when their professional partnership had felt more like something deeper. "Our marriage contract expires in 6 months," he said, voicing the reality they had both been avoiding. "It does. The political benefits have been achieved. Humanity's reputation is restored, the peace negotiations are successful, and both our careers have benefited from the arrangement. All true. So logically, we should begin planning for the transition back to separate lives. Logically, yes." They stood in silence, watching the refugee ships dock with the station. Each vessel represented lives saved, families reunited, hope restored. The work they had done together had changed the galaxy in measurable ways. "I have a confession," Lyra said suddenly. "I've been offered the position of Chief Human Ambassador to the Galactic Council." Kale felt his chest tighten. That's incredible. The position you've been working toward your entire career. It would mean relocating to the Central Worlds, full-time diplomatic duties, no more collaborative missions. You should take it. Should I? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had been willing to address. Kyle turned to face her fully, studying the face that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. 3 years ago, I married you because it was strategically advantageous, he said carefully. Because it served both our professional interests and the greater good. And now I wake up every morning grateful that you're the first person I see. I go to sleep every night hoping you'll still be there when I wake up. I've shared more of myself with you than with anyone in my life, and you've made me a better person than I ever thought possible. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Kale Vorthak, are you telling me that our practical arrangement has become impractical? I'm telling you that I love you, Lyra Salas. Not Ambassador Salas, not my diplomatic partner, not my convenient wife. You. The woman who taught me that strength isn't about winning battles, but about knowing when not to fight them. I love you too, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. I love your honor, your courage, your willingness to change your mind when presented with evidence. I love that you make me want to be worthy of the man who chose conscience over career. So what do we do about the job offer? We figure it out together, like we have everything else. She smiled, the expression transforming her face with pure joy. Besides, I hear the Galactic Council is looking for a new military advisor, someone with experience in interspecies diplomacy and a track record of unconventional problem-solving. Are you offering me a job, Ambassador? I'm offering you a future, Commander, a real marriage, real partnership, real love, the kind that chooses each other every day, not just for 5 years. He kissed her then, there on the observation deck with the stars as witnesses and the refugee ships as a reminder of what they had accomplished together. It was a kiss that sealed not a contract but a promise. So, he said when they finally broke apart, ready to spend the rest of our lives being impractical? With you? She laughed, the sound carrying all the joy and hope of their unlikely love story. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, As they stood together watching the galaxy they had helped heal, Kale marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had married her for practical reasons, but she had become his unlikely soulmate, the person who completed not just his mission, but his very soul. Their marriage had begun as a strategic alliance between strangers, but it had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a love story that would be remembered alongside the peace they had helped create. In a galaxy full of different species, different worlds, and different ways of life, they had discovered that the most profound connections transcend practicality and reach into the realm of the truly extraordinary. The practical commander Kyle Vorthak and the diplomatic ambassador Lyra Salas had become simply Kale and Lyra, two souls who had found in each other not just a partner, but a home among the stars.